Right, yes, enough of that already. Sit up straight, pay attention, stop throwing paper darts down the back. No gum. Today we're dealing with people who continue to be wrong on the interwebs. They continue to be recidivist offenders. They continue to be Fruity Honey Boy here. Disappointing, but not surprising. This is a little video in which Fruity Honey Boy here is now suggesting that diabetics ought to eat honey. Goodness me. Let's see if there's anything valid, worthwhile, robust, or scientifically supportable in anything Paul has to say in his little infomercial for honey here. Shall we? And we'll put him right where he's wrong. Spoiler, boys and girls. Staff. Yep, that's everywhere. Off you go, Paul.
Let's talk about diabetics and honey specifically as a model of this diabetes and sugar suggestion that I'm making, and we'll move from there. But this is all framed in the conversation of artificial sweeteners, good or bad?
Bad.
I'm going to show you lots of interesting evidence in humans and animal studies in this.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Lots of interesting evidence assessed by a bloke here, Paul Salad Fruit Boy, who has no ability whatever to understand scientific literature, to read it, to interpret it with any degree of accuracy, skill, or knowledge, experience in that field whatsoever, and goes half-cocked saying stupid things about it once again today. Go on there, Paul. You're doing a great job, son.
Podcast showing that they're harmful for you in many ways, including worsening your insulin sensitivity. So I don't think anyone should be eating these, even people who are diabetic. Definitely, if you're not diabetic, there is zero reason to have any artificial sweeteners in your diet. So the first paper I want to show you guys is this one. It's an 8-week randomized controlled clinical trial.
Okay, right. Several issues immediately, Paul, that you've missed, as usual, Paul. Number one, 8 whole weeks? Really? You want to make assertions about how people should base their diets, how they should intake nutrient for long-term health on the basis of a study that lasted all of 8 weeks and has no ability to inform on hard health outcomes of any kind. Good, Paul. Awesome. Secondly, the words randomized and clinical in the title of this paper are used inappropriately because this paper is neither randomized appropriately nor is it clinical. To randomize a study appropriately, what you need is 2 subpopulations of people that you are studying that are selected at random from a pool of people. However, for it to be a valid scientific study, those 2 populations of people also need to be genotypically and phenotypically identical at the outset. Did this study do that? No. So this is not an adequately randomized study. Clinical also means in a clinic, which means that they would need to have kept these people under lock and key for all of 8 weeks. Paul, did they do that? No, they didn't. So it's neither randomized appropriately nor is it a clinical trial. Let's just put the words in the title to make it sound like science, when it's not even close to science, in fact. And you've missed that, Paul, because of your inability to read science papers. 8 whole weeks of it, by the way. Right, what's next?
Done in 2009, looking at the effects of...
effects. That would be the conjugative cause, for which you would need adequate control, randomization, tenure, statistical power, all the things this study does not have, Paul. So no, it does not look at the effects of anything whatsoever. It looks at a few biological signals that in a naturalistic, completely uncontrolled series of 2 subpopulations were associated with the taking in of additional honey or not. That's not a scientific study, Paul. That's not an experimental study. No, son.
Natural honey consumption in diabetic patients. These are humans.
Oh, well, that's good. At least it's not a rat study, Paul, but nonetheless, it's not an experimental, well-controlled, well-tenured, well-powered, well-observed metabolic Wol Tholomew study that can inform on cause and effect in any way, shape, or form. Okay?
All right. This is 48 type 2 diabetic.
Right, so 2 groups of 24 individuals. Statistical power, Paul, did you do a calculation on statistical power of the outcome study here? No, I know you didn't, Paul, because I know for a fact you wouldn't be capable of so doing if your life depended upon it, in fact. I can tell you that a study of 24, n equals 24 in one condition and n equals 24 in the other, you would need massive outcome changes with very, very little variation around those outcome differences in those 2 groups to get anywhere near statistical power. So it'll fail dead flat on that one as well. Wait till we get to the signal to noise ratio. I'm sure that's going to be a laugh too. All right. Carry on, Paul. You're doing a great job, son.
Patients who were put into 2 groups. They received oral natural honey for 8 weeks and the control group that did not take honey.
All right. So the control group did not get a placebo then, Paul, did they not? That looks like honey, tastes like honey. You couldn't do that anyway because that would require artificial sweetener, which would invalidate your study. But also, you now have a comparison of effects, so-called, without controlling placebo effect. Invalid. Even if it wasn't only an 8-week study and only 24 individuals in each sub-cohort. Even if it was adequately randomized, which it wasn't. Even if it was clinical lock-in, which it wasn't. This is starting to look very, very poor indeed, isn't it, Paul?
So that is the only intervention. They gave these people honey.
Right. So ergo, not a scientific experimental study that can inform or even make any inference whatsoever on cause and effect as regards people who eat honey and people who don't, those people being diabetics in the first place.
And no honey. How much did they give them? You can see here.
Well, who cares, Paul? Well, I think we've already dealt with this study. We're really done with this. But you're clearly not, because you don't have the skills to pick this paper up, read the abstract and go, I'm done with that. This is nonsense.
In the experimental design, the first 2 weeks.
Experimental design? No, an experimental design includes control, adequate randomization, adequate power statistically, adequate tenure to extrapolate out findings, a lack of covariates, confounds, collinearities and stuff that would invalidate the study, proper placebo, and a bunch of other things, none of which the study has. This is not an experiment. It doesn't have an experimental design. It's a loose, naturalistic observation which should never have been published. It's nonsense, Paul.
They got 1 gram per kilogram per day of honey. The second 2 weeks, 1.5 grams per.
Yummy, yummy, yummy. Paul's got love in his tummy and it's coming from the honey money. No singing. Carry on.
Kilogram per day. The third 2 weeks, 2 grams per kilogram per day. And the last 2 weeks, 2.5 kilograms per day. 2.5 grams per kilogram per day. So I'm about 70 kilograms, 75 kilograms, about 165, 170 pounds. So at the end of this study, somebody who's like me, 5'9", moderately muscular, probably would have different body composition as a diabetic, but a 170-pound person would be getting around 170 plus grams.
Okay, so again, would that invalidate this study, given that they weren't identical groups of people in the first place? What if the overall body composition of the 2 populations was different, because different body compositions would react differently to the same intake of the same amount of honey as per weight, wouldn't it? Oh dear, Paul. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Of honey per day at the end of the study. That's a lot of honey. 170 grams of honey. That's
honey, honey, honey. Paul loves his honey money and no singing.
10, 11 tablespoons of honey per day these diabetics were getting at the end of the study in the last 2 weeks.
Wow, criminal. Let's give someone whose disease process is elevated blood glucose a product containing glucose and also fructose, which will only exacerbate the problem via other mechanisms. Absolutely criminal. What's next?
At the beginning of the study, a 70 kilogram diabetic is going to get 70 grams of honey. then they're going to get 105 grams of honey, then they're going to get 140 grams.
Yeah, we can do the math, Paul, but it doesn't matter. This is rubbish, son.
Of honey per day. And then at the end, they're going to get 175 grams of honey per
Yes. Move on, for goodness sake.
day. 70 kilogram human. So a lot of honey being given to these people over
Yes. Bad idea.
8 weeks. Now, I want to show you guys the results of the
The results. Good. Let's have a look at the results, shall we?
study. What these researchers found was that insulin sensitivity improved.
And how was that measured, Paul? Because you can't measure insulin sensitivity. There is no meter available from any company manufactured anywhere in the world that will measure insulin sensitivity. It's a construct. It's an idea. They might have measured insulin area under the insulin curve following an oral glucose challenge. They might have followed the area under the glucose curve to the same challenge and made some calculation of so-called insulin sensitivity on the basis of those two values, both of which completely fail to understand that the amount of both insulin and sugar in the bloodstream depends not only on the rate at which it's put in there, but on the rate in which it's removed, and both of those can affect the area under the curve. You've got 4, at least, independent variables at play there. Ridiculous. Nonsense. So, also insulin sensitivity. Where is that listed on this chart, Paul?
And lipids improved.
But how do you know, Paul? What's an improvement in lipids? How's that defined?
In the honey group.
But in what way? What way were lipids improved and by how much, Paul? Because, you look at all these figures in this table here, and what you'll see there is massive, enormous signal to noise ratio in favor of noise over signal. None of these results, although they may be statistically significant, none of them are clinically significant purely because of that noise. If you look at the numbers plus or minus after the outcome statistics, let's take, for example, just for one example here, take the body weight in kilograms, which says in the honey group at 0 weeks, they were 71.3 kilograms, plus or minus 12.7. Okay, that plus or minus without a clear statement to classify it otherwise refers to a standard deviation, which means you would need to multiply that standard deviation by 2 in either direction in order to get the variability within the subject population in terms of their weight at baseline. So you've got an average value, absolutely, but you've got all this spread, this huge, enormous wide spread around that average, which wasn't representative necessarily of any one of those 24 people in the group. And so you've got 25.4 kilograms either side of 71. And that's just for 95% of those 24 people. So maybe as low as around 50 kilos and maybe as high as around 90 kilos. Anywhere in there. And there's no indication on the change in the average after 8 weeks that everybody's moved one way or the other. Some people may have gone up, some people may have gone down. There is no way to tell because of this signal-to-noise ratio issue here, Paul. After 8 weeks, 69.5 kilos, plus or minus 11.9. So you've got these two hugely wide standard deviations separated by they're almost superimposed entirely one upon the other. There's nothing to see here. It may be statistically significant, but is it clinically significant? No way to tell. The answer, therefore, has to be, in this case, no. The argument has not been successful. You can go through the rest of these stats for yourself and do the same sorts of calculations, and you'll find the same problem throughout the list. absolutely nothing to see here. And even if there was, it's over 8 weeks in a very small number of people. Just while we're on it, while I was talking about how the subpopulations were not phenotypically identical at the outset, well, here's an example. Body weight. In the control group, the non-placebo group, the invalid comparator, their body weight at the start was 70.3 kilos, less than the honey group. Whoops. Whoopsie, whoopsie, whoops. Dear oh dear. Okay, what's next?
Now, blood sugars went up. I'll show you this in a moment.
Well, bugger me, did they? You feed people sugar and their blood sugar goes up when they're a diabetic? Who'd have thunk it?
And hemoglobin A1C went up.
Bugger me, who'd have thunk that too? It's almost as if you were wrong several weeks ago, Paul, when you made that video claiming that A1C will not be affected by fructose. I know there's glucose in honey as well, and you could blame it on that if you like. But that doesn't change the fact that we actually know for a fact that the A1C test is insensitive to glycation caused by other sugars than glucose. It's happening, Paul. I mean, obviously it's happening. Patently it's happening. To anyone with a set of eyeballs, they can see it. But the A1C test will not see it because it's looking for glycation due to glucose specifically. The paper that you said claimed otherwise actually didn't. It claimed the exact opposite of what you said it claimed in black and white. Remember, I showed that several weeks ago in a video, which you seem to have completely ignored again. It's almost as if you've got honey money in your tummy, honey money in your tummy, rolling round in cash from big honey, no singing. Right, carry on.
But fasting blood glucose, the best metric of insulin sensitivity, went down.
It's not, Paul. False again. And down by how much? Same problem. Signal, noise, signal, nothing to see here.
In these diabetics. This was the only intervention they did.
Yeah, we know that. That's why it's not a valid study. They didn't control anything.
These people didn't get rid of seed oils. They didn't get rid of anything else that I think is a...
They didn't standardize their diets. They didn't keep them under lock and key in a laboratory. They didn't observe them. They don't know what these people ate and didn't eat. Not a science study, Paul. Just nonsense. Nothing to see here whatsoever. Rubbish.
Problem for diabetics. They could have done this study way better if you actually wanted to reverse these people's diabetes.
Yes, they could have done a randomized, properly powered, properly tenured crossover trial in a much larger group of individuals. But they didn't. So why are you talking about this rubbish, Paul? This loosely, badly self-described piece of naturalistic observation without any control or scientific discipline or rigor of any kind. Why, Paul? Is it to do with your incompetence, or is it to do with it suits your ideology that this thing purports to suggest something that it's incapable of suggesting? That honey is good for us somehow if we're a diabetic. No, it isn't, son, still. Okay?
Give them an animal-based diet, give them meat, give them organs, give them raw dairy.
No, organs are a bad idea, Paul. We've covered that in some detail.
Get them into Animal-Based 30, which is happening now. Go to animalbased30.com to sign up and join us.
No, don't do that.
At Heart and Soil, if you want to do Animal-Based 30, it's a free 30-day animal-based eating challenge. We've had...
Well, if you want to listen to Paul Saladino, absolutely. Go ahead and do that. That's Darwin in action. You'll pay the price for that. Paul Saladino is incompetent to speak on human nutrition. Demonstrably, clearly, patently, unequivocally. It's absolutely unassailable at this point how badly off the rails Paul Saladino is and how badly he will misinform you and misdirect you, and you'll end up in a very, very poor situation indeed. If you want to follow Paul Saladino, be my guest.
Had so many diabetics do this challenge and they all lose weight and get significantly better. So in 8 weeks, if you give me a diabetic person, I can significantly improve their diabetes just by changing their diet.
Yeah, but not by giving them honey. You can't, Paul. No, that's not going to be of assistance to a diabetic in any way, shape, or form. So stop pretending that it will. It's disingenuous. It's dishonest. It's criminal, Paul. This is misanthropic malpractice. Okay, you need to be censured for this. It's that simple.
And could even give them honey. But in this
No, Paul, absolutely not. Honey is sugar, and diabetics should not intake sugar, period.
trial, none of that
Sugar, by the way, refers to carbohydrates because they all break down to sugar.
happened. They did not do an animal-based diet. They did not improve
Yes, we know that, Paul. You've said that. We understand that. We get it. What's next?
the quality of the diet. All they did was give them honey
Yes, you've said that too.
in significant amounts.
Yes, you've already outlined that in more detail than we needed as well. Do you have a plan here, Paul? Perhaps you should write crib notes like Dr. Gumby does so that you keep yourself on track.
And what happened? They got more insulin sensitive.
Again, no, there's no evidence of that whatsoever presented here. None at all.
They didn't get less insulin sensitive.
Well, that follows from what you just said, but it's still wrong, Paul.
They became more insulin sensitive.
So you're repeating yourself again, Paul. Brain fog much at all? Heavily glycated brain tissues, perhaps?
So you can see here in the honey group, also lost weight.
Yeah, you said that before as well, and you were wrong. I've already outlined that in detail.
They started at 71.3 kilograms, plus or minus 12.7, and they ended the trial at 69.5 kilograms. That's basically 2 kilograms in 8 weeks. So about
No, it isn't. I've covered that. Nothing of the sort can be established from these numbers. Whatever.
4 pounds, a little more than 4.5 pounds over 8 weeks.
No, Paul. False.
And all they did was give them more honey.
You said that as well already, remember?
They lost weight.
Yes, you've said that. And no, they didn't necessarily. There's no evidence that occurred from these numbers.
The control group did not lose any weight, the exact same weight at the beginning. So the honey group lost weight. That was
No, again, that's about the 4th time you've repeated that claim, and it still isn't established in this paper. No.
statistically significant.
So what? Statistical significance tells us nothing about clinical meaning or significance, nothing whatever. A competent scientist knows that.
The honey group reduced the fasting blood sugar from 153 milligrams per deciliter to 124. The standard deviations.
Again, standard deviations are so wide that that particular average outcome is meaningless. Noise to signal ratio, nothing to see here. No, Paul. Statistical significance be damned. We're looking for a clinically significant change, and you're looking in a group of people that's too small, 24. Over a period of time that's too short, 8 weeks. Looking at a study that is completely ill-disciplined and uncontrolled and unscientific in every way possible. You're making a fool of yourself, son.
Here are 43.9 and 37.5 respectively, but the honey group lowered their fasting blood sugar.
You've said that. You're repeating that one as well. Still not established by those numbers. No.
That is the most important metric that this study did. I would have loved to have
No, it isn't. Not at all.
seen their fasting insulin, but if your fasting blood sugar is going down from 150,
Oh, hang on. So there's no metric of insulin here at all. So how can you talk about insulin sensitivity? That's interesting, isn't it, kids? Staff, boys and girls, attack helicopters, or however else you identify. Wow. Just wow, diddy, wow.
53 to 124.
Well, no, that's an average value with a huge spread around it, such that it's clinically swamped. Noise to signal. Hopeless. No value. No value whatever.
You're technically not even diabetic anymore. Obviously, a fasting blood sugar
Utter nonsense.
of 124 is way too high, but these people would now be considered pre-diabetic at 8 weeks by giving them 175 grams of honey per day.
No, because you didn't control the covariates, confounds, collinearities, and things that totally invalidate that. No control was exerted over these people's diet whatsoever, and neither were they observed to see what they were in fact eating. No, Paul.
Right? The control group, 135.
They weren't a control group. There was no placebo. They were not phenotypically or genotypically identical to the experimental so-called group at the outset. Invalid. Sorry about that.
Milligrams per deciliter, 131.9 at the end of the study. So that, I think, is fascinating. Now,
well, you use the word think, Paul, and I think that that's an inappropriate use of the word think. Because to think, Paul, you need a functioning brain, and it doesn't seem like there's much of one of those going on in your cranium just now. Or indeed for the last about 3 or 4 years, actually, son. I think you ought to stop immediately attempting to do videos surrounding peer-reviewed publications, because you've got no idea what you're looking at or what you're talking about or how to interpret it with any competence at all. You're making an absolute fool of yourself here, son. Sorry about that. That's just the facts, though.
let's talk about the blood sugar.
Yes, let's.
If you give any human 175 grams of honey per day,
Yes.
their blood sugar is going to go up.
No shit.
Which means you're going to see a hemoglobin A1C go up. You're going to
Not necessarily. So you don't even understand that clearly, Paul. Because the A1C purports really to be an indication of the average blood sugar level across time. Okay. What happens after the huge spike in sugar following the intake of the honey? Well, a period of hypoglycemia occurs. So the average, well, you work it out, boys and girls. You've got enough brains. Like any one of you that can see what I'm saying here has more brains than Paul Saladino, clearly.
going to see an increase in average blood sugar over the course of 90 days.
No, not necessarily at all, you buffoon.
Which is what hemoglobin A1C measures. If you're curious about hemoglobin A1C and whether this measures fructose, see the previous video I did.
No, see mine where I was responding to the video he did that shows how he absolutely, utterly got that completely wrong. He even stated in his video that the paper he was using to support his argument claimed that the A1C test does pick up fructose-induced damage to the tissues, when the authors of that study stated unequivocally in clear black and white English that no such thing was in fact true. The exact opposite was true. Go and check that out. That's by far and away the better video for you to watch. I'll try and link it so that you can get to it later, boys and girls. Staff attack helicopters. Okay? What's next?
Did on my YouTube channel about the hidden dangers of a ketogenic diet and how hemoglobin A1C definitely measures.
No, in fact, wrong, Paul. It definitely does no such thing. I've shown that in my video. People should go and have a look at that.
Fructose glycation, and there's no real concern. If you're
false, Paul, that is a lie. Or it's completely incompetent, or it's a completely incompetent lie. Any of which are a reason for you to shut down your channel and stop advising people on nutrition immediately. Okay? Get that done. That would be the best thing you could do for public service, frankly, at this stage.
You're worried about eating fruit and honey and having this glycate your cells, you will see it in the hemoglobin A1C. It's not.
No, you won't, Paul. Not at all. False.
Hidden. There are no dangers of eating fruit and honey.
False. There absolutely are.
In that video, I talk about hidden dangers of eating a ketogenic diet.
And you got them wrong as well, Paul. Completely wrong as well.
Which I'll talk about in a future podcast. But if you're...
Because you do like to repeat yourself, don't you, Paul? I only repeat myself when I have to because the same stupid shit comes out of someone's mouth and it needs correcting again. Clowns like you, Paul, with the brain fog at such an extreme level that you've got, it's your natural behavior, isn't it? It's your natural behavior, isn't it? It's your natural behavior, isn't it? Or maybe you know that psychologically, as a psychiatrist, you probably would know this, that if you repeat a lie often enough with enough conviction, in some people's minds it becomes the truth. It's still not, though, is it? Like, a psychiatrist has any business talking about nutrition, necessarily. There's another one of those lies. You don't, Paul, do you? You can't even read a scientific paper competently. Really, really is embarrassing for you. What's next?
Want the the preview, you should look up a molecule called methylglyoxal.
Oh yeah, I've dealt with that one as well, then when Paul mentioned that. So please do look at my videos on Paul Saladino and my responses to that.
Which is a problematic advanced glycation end product that goes
Sure. Glycation end product is the key term.
up significantly on a ketogenic diet.
No, it doesn't though, Paul. It doesn't necessarily do any such thing whatsoever. False again.
Probably because the glycerol backbone of triglycerides, which are increased from increased lipolysis on a ketogenic diet, forms methylglyoxal. Not a good thing. Back to this study.
Yeah, I've dealt with that. It's nonsense, Paul. There's no issue whatsoever with breaking down fat for energy. None at all.
Hemoglobin A1C went up from 7.1 to 7.7.
Yeah, but look at those standard deviations. They swamp it. It's completely worthless. Completely worthless. It does tend in the upward direction, but it's not significant clinically. Maybe it is significant. No, it isn't even significant with the p-value. It's 0.104. So why you'd even mention that? There's nothing to see there at all. All right, carry on then.
In the honey group. Not surprising. You give people more honey.
No, Paul, that's an insignificant finding, even statistically, let alone clinically. Another incompetent reading of this data set. Incredible.
Their blood sugar is going to go up. But their
Well, no, Paul, not necessarily.
insulin sensitivity got better.
Again, how did you measure that, Paul? Especially considering there's no measure of insulin in this paper.
Fasting blood glucose went down.
Yeah, you've mentioned that. Wrong, still.
I think that if you'd made other changes in these people's diets, they would have improved the hemoglobin A1C and...
Again, you're speculating now. You're guessing on the basis of n equals 24 over 8 whole weeks in a completely uncontrolled, ill-disciplined, naturalistic observation masquerading as an experiment when it was nothing of the sort. Still.
Over time, that hemoglobin A1C is going to come down because there's...
Again, speculating, guessing. You don't know what's going to happen, Paul, clearly. Clearly. Because actually, Paul, what it boils down to here is what you know regarding human nutrition, human metabolism, science, common sense even, is exactly dick about fuck. You don't know anything about this whatsoever. You are an embarrassment. You need to remain silent. Okay?
No way that somebody who's getting more insulin sensitive...
You don't know that, Paul. How is that measured? Still.
...is going to have a rising hemoglobin A1C long term. I think it might peak out at 7.7 or a little
higher. Oh, you think? Do you, Paul? You still know.
Higher, and it's going to come down as it catches up because...
All right. So Paul also has a crystal ball that he can gaze into and know the future. Any indication of what might happen in the future, Paul, is usually, not always, but usually fairly clearly able to be made by looking at the immediate past. So what I would suggest to you, Paul, is put a photograph of yourself even 3 years ago next to one taken relatively recently in the last few weeks and see what you think. See where you're heading. It's up to you, of course.
They're just going to keep getting more insulin sensitive.
You don't know that, Paul.
If you change the diet. Imagine what would have happened if we removed the seed oils from these people's diets. Now, interesting.
We could imagine all sorts of things like these authors did. They imagined that they were doing science.
The control group went from 7.1 to 7.3. So even the control group increased their hemoglobin A1C. If you want to know the average blood sugar conversion...
So that's a clear sign that the diets were not controlled.
7.1, which is where both groups started, is about 157 milligrams per deciliter. At the end of the study, the control group was at 163 average blood sugar, and the honey group was at 174. So
all meaningless statistics because of noise to signal problem.
Giving people 175 grams of honey for the last 2 weeks, and then I outlined how much honey they got before that.
Yes, we know that, Paul. That's one of those things you've already said.
Increase the average blood sugar 11 milligrams.
No. Well, average, yes, but that's meaningless in terms of any one of those individuals or the group collectively, actually, because of the noise to signal ratio issue.
Deciliter, and the fasting blood sugar went down.
No.
lost weight, they got more
No.
insulin sensitive,
No.
and their lipids got better as
No. None of those statements are backed up by this paper, Paul, at all. No.
well. So all the metrics got better.
No, they didn't, Paul. The other thing that didn't get any better recently is your ability to look at metrics and to interpret them with any degree of competence whatsoever. No.
And the hemoglobin A1C went up because their blood sugar went up.
No.
We know this is going to happen. You can
No.
see here on these blood work results,
No.
the triglycerides went from 190
No.
to 148.
No. Noise to signal ratio. Nothing to see here. Not controlled. Invalid comparators. Rubbish.
The honey group, the HDL went from 59 to 66. The LDL
Look at those signal to noise ratio there. No, Paul.
went from 125 to 1.
Ugh, we can pick this paper up and read these numbers for ourselves, Paul. If you're not going to interpret these with any degree of competence, and you're not, why bother going through them at all? You are wasting my time, my valuable time. And you are misleading the public hugely, irresponsibly, misanthropically. This is malpractice. Your qualifications are in psychiatry, son. Go and do that. For goodness sake.
107. So all of these metrics got better
No.
in the honey group,
No.
in diabetics.
No.
So I think this flies in the face of the convention that
Well, that just shows that you are completely incompetent to read scientific literature whatsoever, because it does no such thing. Whew, by the way, goodness. Wow. Whew.
sugar is horrible for
Case closed, I think.
diabetics. The honey is horrible.
And for non-diabetics too. See?
Horrible for diabetics. You should never do this. If you're completely myopic and you only think about your blood sugar,
My God. I don't even know what to say to that. Myopic. Wow.
which misses, in fact, the actual pathology.
What's the actual pathology here, Paul? The actual pathology of diabetes is increased blood sugar, nothing else. That's the pathology. So you're suggesting that a good way of dealing with that is by pouring the very thing that causes blood sugar to rise down people's necks in large amounts daily on the basis of this piece of crap. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. And again, I sound to you, nee. Wow.
The roots of diabetes,
Yes, the roots of diabetes are elevated blood sugar.
you might see that as a problem. But if you're looking at the causative things here, if you're looking at the insulin sensitivity,
That's not the cause of diabetes, Paul. It's a symptom of it. Okay? Elevated blood sugar leads to a problem sometimes with the action of insulin. It occurs at the level of the GLUT4 transporter, and it's under the control of the Randall cycle. Go and look that thing up and understand it. I know you've done a video on that before as well and got that completely wrong as well. Completely wrong. In fact, you took advice from a Raypetian on that. The last person in the world you should listen to about muscle energetics or cellular energetics or nutrition in any way, shape or form is someone who is a Raypetian. You spoke to Georgie Dumkoff about it, one of the most ignorant, arrogant fuck trumpets in the world on this topic. Incredible. What's next?
fasting blood sugar, lipids as an indicator of insulin sensitivity, you'll
No. Again, no.
see very clearly that giving honey to diabetics actually made them less insulin resistant.
No, it didn't. There's nothing in that study that shows this, and it wasn't an experimental piece of work that can establish that anyway, Paul. Still,
Caused them to lose weight,
no. That's not established in that paper either. Remember? Still.
Lipids improved.
No.
It improved their health over.
No. Paul, false claims. All of them. Completely false. Wrong.
Overall.
Wow. There it is. Paul. Son. Seriously. At what point are you going to wake up and smell the bacon? How many times do I have to drag you across the coals and make you look as foolish as you clearly are before you will get it and take the appropriate action? And son, at this point, the only thing appropriate for you to do in the field of human nutrition is to keep your mouth shut permanently on it. You are done in this space. You're finished. You are an absolute joke. Time for you to pull your neck in, wind it in, pull your head in, close your channel down and shut your ignorant mouth permanently. The rest of you, you know the drill. Don't let the door hit you in your six on the way out. Ensure that you have removed any gum from underneath the benches and cleaned off any graffiti you may have written on the back of the next bench in front. Join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs. In the meantime, the dulcet tones of spring from the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. 2, 3, 4.